Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
I think that social media taught me how to do these harmful things, such as, self-harm and restrictive eating. It taught me how to do that. I didn't really know that these things were in the world until the algorithms on Instagram popped up and showed me how to harm my body to make me feel better.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Shez Leby and Stephanie Boy, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
It should come as no surprise that social media can be destructive. There are a plethora of articles, studies, documentaries on this topic. The bombardment of images of these curated lives, of aspirational perfect bodies, and so-called fitness experts that give you advice on everything from how to lose those extra pounds to healthy eating tips. But you can also find truly malevolent individuals who give unhealthy, even deadly advice. Today, we are talking to Ruby. She is on a journey to recovery from self-harm that ultimately landed her in the hospital for disordered eating, which I didn't realize were sort of all along the same spectrum. And much of what she learned was about extreme dieting and how to hide her weight loss. She learned that through social media influencers, which is so scary.
So scary. But thankfully, Ruby is now in a good place with her journey of recovery. But unfortunately, many people with eating disorders cannot say that. I know that for a fact. I really loved hearing Ruby's gems of insight and the tools that keep her going in the right direction. This was really good stuff. But it is important to say that if any of you out there struggle with self-harm, please remember the number 988. This is the new, free, confidential National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And if you want to get deeper into eating disorder help, please call NEDA, which is the National Eating Disorder Helpline. And that number is 1-800-931-2237. Finally, Steph and I really want you to know that no matter what you've gone through, you are not alone. So let's jump into Ruby's story.
Welcome to the show, Ruby, and thank you so much for being willing to talk to us about social media and its perhaps negative influences. What we came to was really understanding that social media led to a bigger issue in your life. And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I would say that social media has very negatively impacted my childhood. I got my first social media platforms at around 12. Just, the first year of middle school, I wanted to really meet people online that I was going to be meeting in school. And the more and more I was on social media, the more I found myself struggling mentally. I definitely struggled with anxiety and depression at a young age. And it wasn't clinically diagnosed until a couple years later when I was also diagnosed with my eating disorder. But I think that social media taught me how to do these harmful things, such as, self-harm and restrictive eating. It taught me how to do that. I didn't really know that these things were in the world until the algorithms on Instagram popped up and showed me how to harm my body to make me feel better. That's what they were saying, that it would make me feel good.
Can you give us a little bit of insight? How does that happen? Did you seek that stuff out? We know the algorithms are feeding you what you're looking for, but what kind of things would it tell you? How deep and dark does it go on social media?
Well, since social media was, I think, relatively new at that age for me, the algorithms were very deep, very dark. And now they have some qualifications that if they'll get notified and they can delete an account. But back then it was horrible. And one of my friends who was struggling with self-harm, I may have been talking about it with her or something, but it popped up on my page. I didn't seek it out, but the phones, they listen to us. So who knows, maybe it was listening to me. And it was all of these accounts on what self-harm is, who does it, why they do it, how does it make them feel? And they were really pro like hurting yourself. And that taught me how to do it and taught me, they were saying, do this and it'll make you feel better. Hurt yourself and it'll give you some satisfaction in life. And so I tried it and it was horrible. And I cried because I tried it and I was so mad at myself. For me, luckily, I did have that inner voice that said, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this to your body. But I still was so sad from my depression. I was just trying to feel something. And my mom found out and we talked about it. And she actually made me shut off Instagram, like delete my account, because I was so young at that point. I was like 13. So she was like, we're going to cut you off of this for a little bit. And then I finally did get back on. But no one knowing that I had that episode and knowing to myself that I felt so sad and so lonely all the time, no one else picked up on it. Or if they did, they didn't make a move. And I was struggling with my anxiety and depression far before my eating disorder even started. And no one really, I didn't reach out, but at that age, I don't feel it's not the responsibility of a preteen to reach out and say, I'm really confused on why I feel the way I feel. I might need help, because at that age, you don't fully understand that's, that depression and anxiety is common, but it's treatable. And so no one, I didn't get help.
I imagine, Ruby, like a lot of individuals that struggle with eating disorders, I imagine that your grades were really good, that you worked really hard. You're one of those, quote unquote, good girls that's just trying to do, her best kind of thing. So it does go under the radar. And so does cutting. If you're talking, are you talking about cutting as self-harm? Yeah. So cutting goes under the radar for a while too, because I know of girls in particular that will only cut above the shorts line or above the skirt line or in an area where it's not going to be noticed. And it's only when mom or somebody might catch you in a bathing suit or, changing for a shower or whatever, that they might say, hey, what's that? Or see old scars. But a lot of kids find ways to hide those scars. So I did wonder that if those sites went so far as to tell you what to use to cut and how to do it to hide it. And how did your mom find out about it? And did she or you feel at that point, hey, maybe I need to talk to somebody? Those are 4 big questions. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So yes, the sites definitely did a lot of information on how to do it, how to hide it. That was all there, because especially people would kind of like brag almost like that they were doing it for this long and that they were hiding it for this long. And they would post literal pictures or videos of them doing it to themselves. And it was it was traumatizing to see, but also I was intrigued almost, because it was so traumatizing and because I felt like I had the same mindset as that person, that I almost felt like, it could be me. And so it was really, looking back on it now, I didn't enjoy the process. It wasn't what I wanted.
It makes me think when you say that of people who like join ISIS, like I know that's extreme, but it's that connection with people. Like if you feel disconnected, and I mean, obviously that has a lot to do with a lot of our self-worth. You were saying that you felt really lonely And I imagine that going on and like, oh, I see people on social media and they seem to have the same struggles or issues or I have, and this has helped them, no matter how destructive it is.
Right.
That's enticing. There's a part of you that says like, well, it works for them if I keep doing it or whatever. And that just kind of like normalizes that behavior.
Yes.
Is that true, Shez?
Yes, absolutely. And that's where it's very dangerous because it can normalize it to somebody as young as 12 years old who does not know that, oh, this is not okay, or this is not a way to cope with distress. It's basically a mechanism that people are using to cope with intense emotion and to feel if they've been cut off from emotion. And so it's very dangerous. And that's where, you know, there definitely need to be some restrictions and some accountability and something in those realms, because it will feed disaster, you know, where it can be taken too far. And we just don't know how often that happens.
Right.
But how did your mom find out about it? Did you tell her?
I didn't tell her. My sister did. And I told my sister because the second that it happened, I fell apart. I went from, you know, kind of trying to be secretive and whatever to realizing that this was not the right way to do it, to try, you know, to bring up emotion or to feel, period. And so I was crying and crying and crying. And my sister was like knocking on the door, like, are you okay? So she came in and I was crying in her arms for a while. And I was like, do not tell mom, because I'm never going to do it again. I promise. But she told her anyway. And I actually am glad that she did because I could have been lying. Who knows? But yeah. And so my mom found out that way and she pulled me out of school and we just talked for a long time. I don't know why she didn't think that a therapist was the right choice, which would have been. I'm a strong believer in therapy. But I don't know, maybe she has some sort of subconscious thing about, you know, that she didn't want her kid to be in therapy. That's kind of common with older generations, but she didn't send me. I didn't talk to anyone, but I've always been very close to her and my sister and my dad too, but my mom knows basically everything about my life. So we would talk a lot, but she, you know, she wasn't qualified. She didn't really understand. So I wish she did take me to therapy because it may have prevented my eating disorder.
So that came next, right? Like, so you started with self-harm and then it moved into an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Because an eating disorder is a progression of self-harm. Like that is the ultimate way to starve yourself of self-harm. And then it feeds into all this cultural things that we were talking about, of all the standards of what we're supposed to look like or supposed to be. And I know you mentioned your doctor said something too that was really interesting and important.
Right. Yeah. My doctor for a long time had really pushed it that I needed to lose at least 10 pounds, at least. And, you know, my doctor loves me. I know that, but clearly nobody was trained on how to chat with a growing child about their weight and their body image and all of that. When you're growing, when you're a young woman like me, and I was growing and I started getting boobs and I started, you know, getting a belly, that was scary. And it wasn't really talked about because it's quite normal, but I wasn't coping well. And so when my doctor was like, well, you need to lose 10 pounds, she was kind of threatening pre-diabetes, which was scary at my age. So I just was like, you know what, finally, after a couple of years of hearing that, I was like, all right, fine, I'll do it. And I started to lose weight slowly and, you know, with the proper, you know, exercise. And I was trying to eat a little bit better, but I was still enjoying my life. I really was, until I learned about the paleo diet. As soon as I was looking it up on my phone, it popped up on my social media. Surprise, surprise. And so I learned a lot about the paleo diet through that. And it only took about a month of trying paleo recipes for it to go from, trying something because I know it has been, maybe it's a little bit healthier than a store-bought cake, to a full-blown eating disorder where I was, losing weight far too rapidly, and I ended up in the hospital.
Shez, I know that probably when our kids were younger, they used to do this BMI index and they would give it to kids in school, which I think is just, what kind of crazy stuff is that? Like, can you imagine being at work and someone handing you your BMI? I mean, how ridiculous, especially at an age where kids are talking about, I don't know if they still do that. I actually think they may still, but it is an interesting thing because you're talking to somebody who's supposed to be looking out for your health. And I understand how when they say something, you're going to take it more seriously. There are those kids who do become diabetic. What is the way to approach that for a parent or a healthcare provider? How do you help someone become the healthy version of themselves? Because I imagine, just like Ruby, if my doctor told me that, I'd be like, oh my God, of course I need to go on a diet, right?
I have so much to say on that. Okay, so there's a balance with this, and we are not there yet, but America is unhealthy, right? So we all know that. We do have the highest rates of juvenile diabetes ever. So that is a scare for doctors. I believe that if for you, Ruby, if your doctor, and I've heard of this before, so I'm not just calling out your doctor. As a matter of fact, there's personal experience that I know of a doctor actually pinching a girl's stomach, abdomen, and saying, yeah, you could stand to lose a little bit, because she was on the border of an eating disorder. And she asked, am I the right weight? And he was like, maybe you could stand to lose a little bit. Well, wham, then it's turned into a full-on eating disorder. So clearly these doctors might not be trained enough in how to speak to adolescent girls, that's not part of pediatric medical school. I don't know, but how to talk to pubescent boys and girls, because it's not just girls, it's 30 million Americans. So, it follows the gamut. I believe that if your doctor, Ruby, had said, hey, you know what, these questions would be really good to talk to a nutritionist. If instead she didn't look at numbers, but just said, okay, you're concerned about that, let's go talk to a nutritionist and help your family with nutrition. Because here's why I say it this way, Steph. I was that mom that I wouldn't have normal Oreos. I would have the Newman Zone. I wouldn't have Cocoa Puffs and whatever. I would have the, super no sugar, whatever. Like I was a nut about it. And I think that I contributed to some of my own family's issues because I went so the other way with not having sodas in the house or whatever. And my kids would actually go to their friends' houses and be like, can we have a snack? Can we have Oreos? Whatever. So I think that if it's a team approach, and maybe this is where integrative medicine is leading, but if it's integrative pediatrics, where it's, hey, if you have these kind of issues or questions, let's get with a psychologist, a nutritionist, and the pediatrician to look at the physiology, the genetics, the psychological part, and the food part, and work together as a team. And that's what treatment does. Treatment, the reason why it works is because it is a team approach. You're getting information from all sectors to work together to say, hey, what's going to work best for you? So that's why I love that question. Thank you for asking, Steph.
When you just say to someone, oh, I'm going to pinch an inch on you, and you need to lose some weight, that's so narrow focused,
right? And
not addressing all of the underlying things that could be at play here, and because all of us are individual. It would be absurd to think that, if you have an alcoholic parent and that's how you cope by eating, that's the same as somebody who was being made fun of as a child for being the chubby kid or whatever that happens to be, or just having an underlying depression, anxiety, and all of those are very different reasons. It's also a control that sometimes it happens as a result of some type of physical or sexual assault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that you brought up that BMI thing, because I think that was like, remember back in the day in gym class, you had to write down your weight or whatever. And so for someone struggling with an eating disorder in any way, or with anything with weight, whether it blossoms into an eating disorder or not, those kind of things should be done differently. Like we're in 2020, those should be done differently, privately, not where it can be out there for the whole class or the whole world to see. And I also think that doctors in particular, especially adolescent pediatricians, I would hope that they would have that kind of training where that communication would be a little bit gentler, easier, done in a better way, and handled with more of an integrative approach than just the strictly clinical, here's your weight and here's where you might need to be. Bam, that's it. She didn't give you tools necessarily on what to do, as a growing teen. And that's dangerous too. So I'm not calling anybody out in particular, because this isn't just that doctor. This does happen. So across the board, that's one thing that needs to change. So we can blame social media. We can blame a lot of different factors, but for change to happen and for us to lower this epidemic number of, girls and boys struggling with eating disorders, we've got to change things on many levels.
Yes.
We're talking about eating disorders. I know that probably, I think you said that it started out as anorexia, but you had mentioned something, and I found it very interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to hear you and Dr. Shez even discuss, because of like the paleo diet that you were following, the diet that actually fell more under the realm of something called orthorexia, which I had never heard of before. So maybe you can tell Shez, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and maybe you can explain, Ruby, how that was really one of your disordered eating patterns or behaviors.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know that orthorexia was a thing, but in treatment, we learned about all the different types of eating disorders. And orthorexia is when you just have an obsession with eating healthily, and basically you're restricting yourself of anything that is quote unquote unhealthy. And that can be different for every person. Some people are taught that frozen yogurt is unhealthy, and other people are taught that it's the opposite. So when the paleo diet started for me, that's when I was taught through the paleo diet that carbohydrates were unhealthy. So I ended up restricting all carbohydrates, which is horrible because your brain needs carbs. Your brain and your body and your muscles and everything needs carbs. And at first, my family didn't think it was a problem because I was just trying to eat healthier to lose the weight. So it went, like you said, under the radar for far too long. Even after I was severely underweight, my mom was almost trying to convince herself that I was still okay, that I was still just eating healthy, but maybe I needed to eat a little bit more. But she didn't fully understand the extent of how little I was eating. So getting someone who's in that control of eating what they are, day to day, it's nearly impossible to force them to eat something more unless you're, literally forced to in treatment.
Tricky part of orthorexia, because I think that it does go undetected for so long, because parents might think, oh, wow, my child cares about their health, and, they're doing the right thing, and they're focused on, getting the right nutrients or whatever. And it can quickly lead into anorexia and bulimia because it's not sustainable forever.
Right.
And then there's this whole cycle of, and I don't know, were you bulimic too? Did you have? No.
I never experienced bulimia, but you know what I find that goes hand in hand, and I on some level experienced this, was with orthorexia. A lot of people tend to then develop binge eating disorder because you're not letting yourself have any of the quote unquote unhealthy stuff. So then one day you snap and then you binge all of that stuff. And then it can lead to either, purging, through exercise, through making yourself throw up, anything. But it becomes this vicious cycle of binging, restricting, purging for people. And realistically, I also learned this through treatment, that purging, it doesn't have to be through making yourself sick. It can also be through exercise. And that is something that I struggled with as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's the problem, is because of course you want to exercise, like that's part of being healthy. And then where does it become overly excessive, compulsive thing? And where is it okay? And that's the same thing with food. Where is it okay for me to eat all foods, and that all foods are acceptable in a certain, range? And then where does it become obsessive, or where does it become excessive? It's a very hard balance with those things. I was so taken when you said that you lost half your body weight in a very short period of time. Like, that shows how fast this can progress to be the deadliest disease that it is. I think it's second to opioid overdoses in deaths for teens. So it's scary because it can happen really, really fast. And when we were talking about social media stuff and all the Finsta sites of, these clearly anorexic people, they're facing death. Like, I see them and I think, oh my gosh, they might not be alive next week, So I'm so glad that you did get the treatment that you got, because that's a massive amount of body weight to lose in such a short period of time.
And honestly, I had said before that it wouldn't have mattered if my mom had forced me into treatment 2 weeks earlier or 2 weeks later. And I was so wrong, because for me, for other people, they can go from, if say you have depression and you're really struggling with that, also with your eating disorder, it can take 2 weeks before you go from, just struggling with depression to suicidal. For me, the first day that I entered the inpatient treatment, I actually fell to the floor. I passed out from tachycardia. My heart rate was 25, and it's supposed to be a lot higher than that. And, if I had waited another week, I could have had some severe heart damage. And it's not even just your physical appearance and physical body that suffers. It took me 2.5, 3 years to get my period back. So I didn't have a period for that long, and that can mess with your hormones. And there's just so many things. My hair, I lost my hair. It took a long time for that to start to come back. So there's a lot of signs and physical signs that don't even get detected until the last second. And then you really need to pick it up and work to get back to a place where your body is happy again.
I think there's two really important things here that I want to make sure that we talk about. The first is, you talk a lot about your relationship with your mom and what is a parent supposed to do? And as you had said, a parent absolutely needs to dig in. And I think that's important for parents to hear, because sometimes we don't know where the line is, especially when our children are dealing with depression and anxiety that's underlying all of this. Sometimes they can really push you away. Like when I'm talking to parents about the subjects I know, I say, don't worry about talking, because you can never unring the bell, right? So what should a parent do or a friend do when they see this and they're alarmed about their friend or they're alarmed about their child? Maybe some ways that you can know, yeah, my child really is in danger here. I know you had given me some tips. What are the things that you now looking back go, these were the telltale signs of danger?
I think what might be helpful, Steph, is if we post a list of those signs based on what I know clinically, and then Ruby, what you know from experience. I think if we can give parents a list of those signs to look for.
We'll put that in the resources connected to the podcast.
I think that would be amazing. So let's have that list up. I feel like in any of these topics with our kids, it all stems back to communication. So when we notice that something's off, we know it in our gut, we know it by seeing, we know that patterns are developing that are unhealthy. And the more that we can open the door to say, how are you doing? You know, what is going on, with no other distractions, no cell phones, no TV, no sitting in the car, but just how are you doing? And kind of assessing, and then not being afraid of therapy. There's this stigma about therapy that, you know, my generation and sometimes younger, and of course older, definitely still has this stigma about therapy meaning I failed as a parent, or therapy meaning I messed up. And it doesn't mean that at all. It means we're in the mix of these perfect storms all the time, of social media, of cultural stuff, of familial stuff, of school bullying, of, you know, doctors, whoever, all these things. And if we let it go, it becomes disastrous, which is why we have these epidemic rates of teen suicides that we have. So we can't let things go, but we also don't have to take it on as our fault and our one and only problem. Like, I think that's when we call in somebody to say, hey, I don't understand what this is, but can you help me with what do I need to do? And what is this? My wondering for you, Ruby, and I really want to go here because I think this is important part of this. When you talk about this, I can tell that you're even almost smiling or laughing about it. And it is the hardest and worst part of your life. So there's still an incongruence with emotion, if you'll be okay with me saying that.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we can help all people, because you're not the only one. Like, I've got it. We've all got that, where I think it's so important to allow the weight of our emotions in the moment. Like, this is heavy stuff, but I don't feel that from you. And so something got cut off there because it was so traumatizing. That's what I believe, that even that, looking back on it, you're still above the trauma. You're not going to get in it. And I don't want you to, because this isn't therapy, but I'm just saying it's information to say, like, how important it is that we have access to recognize, feel, and work through our emotions versus still just kind of staying at the surface and finding ways to plow on through it. So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
It's kind of funny, I guess, that you say that, because I'm very black or white when it comes to this type of stuff. When I'm talking about my experience, I guess maybe it depends on who I'm talking to. If it's someone who understands on some level what I went through, I'm a little bit more like lighthearted when I'm talking about it. But when I'm teaching someone, more say, about what I went through and how it affects more than just me, I'm more serious. And also sometimes still, I look back at pictures and I'm sad. I'm deeply sad that I let myself get to that point, but I don't blame myself. But it's sad. Then there's also the part of me that's like, some of this stuff, I can't even believe that me and my family just let it slide. It's ridiculously funny how dumb we all were. That's kind of maybe why I almost laugh sometimes at some of the little things that I talk about, because in any real world, how is that safe? How is that normal? Why are people just letting these kids or these people slide under the radar and nearly kill themselves? It's really mind-blowing.
I mean, if your pulse was that low that you passed out, thank God you were in treatment.
Yeah.
It could have been, or in the hospital. I mean, that's what you needed. Absolutely.
Right.
So I think we're doing a real service to help people get help way before that happens. But I think it's a lifelong process of being okay to talk about difficult emotion and difficult aspects of our lives or topics, and really be okay that we can feel through those. Like, this is heartbreaking to me that you were that plagued by this thing
Mhm.
that it got to that point that fast. That was your whole life. I can't even imagine how you went to school.
I don't either.
I don't know how you did it.
No.
Your brain was not able to function.
Right. And there I was being that perfectionist that is very common with eating disorders, getting hundreds and A's on everything. And now, I'm very much more relaxed about school and all that because I realize it's not my life, but I can barely sit through class without being like, oh, I'm so sick of this. But before I was all invested. It was the only thing I had besides my eating disorder.
Yeah. One more question. Do you feel like there was any kind of childhood trauma thing that started the anxiety and depression, or like bullying, or, I don't know, was there anything that you can pinpoint?
So I didn't have like a real true traumatic event. Like, there are some situations that are horrible. I was teased and bullied for my weight. I do remember there some specific things that happened where kids would say, one kid said that I should kill myself, that the world would be better off without me. And it was a one-time thing. And I heard that and it stuck with me forever. There are definitely some of my old friends before I had lost weight, they would make comments on my weight or talk about me behind my back and I would find out. And then when I lost weight, that just never happened anymore. And so I think it was a lot of these little events of feeling rejected because of my weight. I was also a teenage girl who wanted to like a boy and have a boy like me back. And it never happened. I was always the friend. And some of these boys said to my friends that, oh, she's too fat or whatever. And so I became very resentful towards people. And that really went hand in hand with my depression because I started to isolate myself and then I just struggled all alone. Yeah. So I guess it's
so much sense. Today, as your brilliant, healing, connected self that you are, Ruby, what one sentence would you say back to that boy who told you you should just kill yourself?
I would probably say, think about the words that you're going to say to people because you need to put out positivity into the world. Otherwise, you're never going to get positivity back. Something on the lines of that, like, you need to think about what you're saying and how you're treating people. Because if everyone works hard to treat people with respect, the world will be such a better place. And so many, hardships that we all go through could be decreased.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. There's so much that you said that I want to comment on, and I'm like fiercely writing little notes to myself right here. It's hard in our culture. There are these like cultural norms that even when companies try to show one different body type, they're always using still the cultural norm, the skinny, tall model girl, and then the other body type or the other skin type. I mean, we're not idiots. So when you are getting these messages back from our culture, like obviously everyone's been indoctrinated. Some people would call it like colonized to believe these certain ideals are perfect. You're getting these messages back that are reinforcing your unhealthy behavior, right? Like the friends are no longer talking about you behind your back. Mm-hmm. People are telling you, oh, you look good. Oh, you're taking care of yourself, because you're starting to fit more into the old mold, what our culture, what we define as beautiful and acceptable. Right. So when you had told me that you found it hard to do recovery, and I was like, what does she mean? There was something in me that clicked that said, recovery for somebody who has an eating disorder that makes them thin, makes them the cultural norm. To do recovery means that you are going countercultural. If you're an alcoholic and you do recovery, you're going toward the cultural norm of not falling down and blacking out, right? Right. When you do recovery for overeating, you're going toward the cultural norm of being this acceptable, beautiful body type, right?
Mhm.
When you do porn recovery, you're no longer cheating on your spouse, or you're no longer like emotionally cheating or whatever. You're going toward the cultural norm. But when you are recovering from eating disorder where you are thin, what the culture tells us is the best, you are doing the opposite. And I think that has to be really overwhelming.
Yeah, well, a lot of the issue was that I was putting my self-worth with how thin I was getting. And every single time that I was dropping a pound on the scale, it was validation. Every time that somebody said, "Oh, wow, you're looking really good," it was validation. And it just kept me going into this spiral.
But did health mean that you were going the other direction of people maybe talking about you again? Or
Right.
that's this is like a weird, real mind, excuse the expression, it's a mind fuck.
It is.
It is. It is.
And, it's there. And then it becomes like, you can suffer from anorexia at any body size, but in a lot of experiences when people like, you can tell that something is really wrong for so long while they're losing the weight. It's like, oh, good for you, good for you. When you finally hit that little, that milestone of, oh God, they look sick, then it's like a whole nother round of being invalidated, saying like something is wrong with that person. Oh, she needs to eat a burger. Like, stop with the comments. Like, no judgment. I don't understand why there's just judgment on every type of body, and there's no happy medium. Because realistically, when say you are at like a culturally, beautiful standpoint or whatever, you're still going to criticize yourself no matter what. To be like, another one is like to be more muscular or to be more toned or all of these things. You're never going to get up to your standards and to society's standards. So like there has to be a point in time where we need to be taught how to separate the old culture, because we need a new one. We need a new culturally accepted mindset, and really focus on how to love yourself no matter what size you are. And that's so freaking hard. But there needs to be some sort of like, even in schools, instead of learning about something that is, I don't know, something else in like health class, learn about body positivity, but like integrating it into everyday class, especially for young kids. Like there has to be some way to do it.
Yeah. What were some of the best tools that you were able, like that you could look at now and go like, this really helped me?
100% therapy. I seriously think that no matter who you are, everyone can benefit from therapy, but also journaling, because it's like you're talking to yourself. It's very private, but when you write it down, it's just a different way of processing it. And you can go back and see your progress. So when you feel like, oh, I don't even know if I made any progress, you look back and you're like, oh, okay, I really have. But focusing on, because I consider journaling as like a self-care. Like self-care is so important for recovering, well, for everybody, but for recovering from any type of addiction. You need to do things that make you genuinely happy, because you need to re-spark that joy in life with something that isn't your addiction or your eating disorder or any of that. So self-care is part of that. I say journaling, therapy.
I like that you said journaling, because I get to look at my progress. I can look back 3 months ago and say, that's where I was. I've come this far, and use that as like a inspiration to keep moving in the direction of what is healthy for you.
Right.
One of the tools, and I don't know if you did this, Ruby, but one of the tools that I've found really helpful with clients, and I will say that eating disorders is one of the hardest disorders to treat. It really is. But one of the things to do is to externalize the eating disorder. So it's not something internal in me, but I can see it as a separate entity almost. and to name it. A lot of kids will name their eating disorder Ed or some other name. So it's outside of self. And then when you journal, you're writing to, let's say the eating disorder's name is Ed, writing to Ed and saying, stop it, Ed, like you cannot control my life, or I'm not going to put up with this anymore, or whatever, that you can say. That's a really good tool to keep it as a separate from your own psyche.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it, through journaling. Did you do that at all?
I did actually. And mine was named Anna.
Oh, Anna, great. Yeah.
And I'm so happy that you brought that up because I actually forgot about it. But one of the things that we did as a group in treatment was write a letter to our eating disorder. And they really emphasized, like, you are not anorexia. You are dealing with it, or you have anorexia, but it's not who you are.
Right. That's such an important distinction. You are a human being on a path, but you struggle with something called anorexia, but it's not who you are. And that's where writing a letter to Anna separates that from being you. That's exactly the purpose.
And as I said before, my eating disorder was like my best friend. But when I started going into treatment and really doing that, separating my eating disorder from me, we wrote letters, and I wrote a letter and I was swearing at it. I was, angry, and it was liberating and funny and fun. And then, in the moment, I was like legitimately pissed. I was really angry and I was just like scribbling. But then looking back at it, I looked like last year actually, and I'm reading it and I'm smiling and I'm like, I love how angry I got, because it really helped me put it into a different perspective that I didn't have before.
Right. And you can't be best friends with Anna because Anna was killing you.
Exactly.
So to develop that anger means you're feeling. And so that makes me really happy because you could actually feel in that letter.
Yeah.
And when you're cutting, when you're self-restricting food, when you're doing any of these kind of things, perfectionism, you're not feeling, you're just plowing forward with some kind of goal. So that is a tool for eating disorders, is one of the number one. The second I really want to say is that it's important that listeners know that there's the National Eating Disorders Association, NEDA, and they have a crisis line that you can call, and you can get tools like this. You can get support. You can get resources in your area, in addition to the 988 National Crisis Hotline, which will kind of do that as well. But the NEDA one is really tailored to eating disorders, and any age, they're available.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. And I love that advice. I actually feel like that advice would work for almost anything. It's almost like you're writing to ego. Like the ego says, this is what I am. I am X. I am this eating disorder. I am even sexual assault victim. You know what I mean? Anything it feels like that you identify with, you can separate from yourself and write a letter to, which seems to me that would be very cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
We had talked about how anorexia and eating disorders are some of the hardest conditions to treat. I can relate it a lot to what I talk to people about is porn addiction, because ultimately you have to have a relationship with sex. Sex is part of almost every person's life. So eating is a part of every person's life. Dr. Shez, what you always say is really important are relationships. And this is a legitimate relationship like you have with anyone. You have to have this healthy relationship with either sex or eating. Food is a part of survival.
Right.
Sex is a part of survival. These are such hard conditions to treat because you can't just ignore it. You can't walk away from it. It's not like gambling. You don't have to gamble. You don't have to drink alcohol.
Right. And it's a relationship with your body too. It's changing the relationship with yourself, because that's what's disordered too, is the relationship with your body and you and what matters and what you value. And that's at the heart of the sex addiction too, or porn, is relationship with yourself and, the heart of who you are and what drives you versus these other things that kind of get out of control. So yes, it's all about relationship, and it is not easy, that's for sure, but it can be done. We didn't talk about family-based treatment. That's kind of the gold standard these days of interventions without necessarily needing hospitalization, but you were to a point where you needed it. So, but that's another topic too.
Ruby, I am so grateful for your time and for you sharing with us your story. And I just wish you continued luck on your journey to healthy relationships with food. And you should be really proud of yourself because you're amazing and you're helping other people by your story.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate both of you for showing and really talking about the hard stuff, because everyone, we need to hear it. It needs to be out there more. And this is the only way to learn how to make a change in our world. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your courage to share. That was some brave stuff you shared, and I'm really grateful.
Of course.
Wonderful.
Take care, Ruby.
All right. Bye. Have a good day, guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
So I just want to say, after our interview with Ruby, I was struck by what a brilliant, poised, wise warrior woman she is. To literally, she's a person that can say that she brought herself back to life. She really did. So I just want to honor that and say that. And then, talk about our impressions, because there was a lot there. So I'm sure you have a lot of stuff that you walked away with. I know I was reminded of a lot of things. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts. I haven't heard them yet, so I'm excited.
Yes. One thing, we've talked to Ruby a couple of times, but I keep doing like the research about these companies and what are we doing to promote body positivity. So I keep thinking about how we need to do more as a culture. Companies really need to embrace this, and not just size, it's colors. It's representative of all of us in this country, that people need to see themselves represented. This happens a lot even in the work that I do. The reason that a lot of kids go to porn or will go anywhere is because they need to see themselves represented. If they're not represented in something, there's a real feeling like you don't matter, or your story isn't important. So, or that you don't have value. All of these things, showing colors and showing body types, is really important, because none of us fit into this narrow mold of beauty that our culture has set up. That was really one of my takeaways, that the more we see ourselves represented positively, the more we are going to feel okay, and we can start to battle some of the things that are taking kids down, this idea that they have to be this big and all that kind of stuff. So that was one thing that really stood out for me, is showing diversity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My second takeaway is Ruby talked about her mom's concern about her weight. And I immediately, of course, thought of myself. You had mentioned how your house, you were like always about healthy foods and healthy versions. And I just thought about our responsibility as parents. And I thought that starts with self-love for, the parents. We grew up in a different generation where, no one even talked about different body types. We were just presented with all of these thin people, beautiful, the Charlie's Angels, and we aspired to be that. We didn't even know we had options. So I think a lot of this has to start with our own mantras to ourselves. And I was in the shower this morning and I literally was like, I have a belly from having babies. And I was like, I love this belly. It allowed me to have 3 babies. I love these arms. They allow me to carry the groceries upstairs and to hold my babies, or to pick up my cats, or to hug my husband. There's a lot of people who don't have these things, and we have to be kinder and extend grace and mercy to ourselves. And it starts with us as the parents. It starts with the people around you. But it really did change the way normally I would look and go, I'm not doing that anymore, because that is generational and I'm going to hand that down. So that was my second thought. And then my third overwhelming thought was about this orthorexia thing, because I have definitely seen lots of kids who are wearing layers, and I don't understand. I live in South Carolina. It's hot as Hades here. And how are they wearing so many layers? And I started to just see that this orthorexia thing, it really can go hidden and look like just being healthy. But we really have to take a look at our kids, and we really have to say, it's not normal that you're wearing 10 layers in the middle of the summer, or that you want your seat heater on, or that I can see all the bones in your spine, like these are things that we need to be aware of. And I didn't even know it was a thing. So I think it's really important that parents realize anorexia or disordered eating doesn't end with bulimia and anorexia. There are many different forms, I guess, on a spectrum. That was really eye-opening to me.
Good stuff. This was such a good interview. Okay, so yes, my 3 takeaways, somewhat similar along that line with when you're talking about orthorexia and things for parents to look out for. What I was reminded of from Ruby is how deadly this disease can be. When I heard the amount of weight she lost and her pulse rate, my heart sunk, because it is absolutely deadly, and it can be hidden, and it's sneaky, and it's insidious, and it's very, it takes over. I'm not saying she is those things, but this disease takes over where it's all consuming. And, she got straight A's. So it wouldn't be the person that you think is struggling. And so that's where, yes, awareness of parents. My second thing is the awareness of doctors and the team of people that we work with in our communities, our schools, our health coaches, our sports coaches, to be really better educated. I'm hoping that when I hear these kind of stories over and over, it makes me feel like they're not as educated of how certain phrases or certain things that they do can actually trigger and activate an eating disorder versus, healing and helping this situation. So I think that was a big takeaway and a big reminder as a second thing to really work together. In terms of the deadly thing, my first one, I want to make sure people know, and we'll put it in our notes, that, there's the NEDA hotline, which is 1-800-931-2237. And that only has certain hours a day. I thought it was 24 hours a day. It's not. It's certain hours, but they can help you with specifics about eating disorders because they are the National Eating Disorder Association and help with resources. Otherwise, if it's a 24/7 emergency, you can always call 988, the new 24/7 national hotline, which is really important for people to know. What Ruby showed us is that treatment does work, and it is a continuum of care. It's not just a one and done and you'll be free from this necessarily, but it's a continuum of care, but it does work. So that gives hope. My third important thing was that, gosh, I love this woman, and yet her affect did not match the severity of what she was speaking about. So that's another way that an eating disorder cuts you off from feeling. And that started way, way back for her, which is why she cut, because cutting or self-harm helps you feel. And after she cut, remember, she said, I cried and cried and cried. And that's when my sister came to me. So we need to teach people ways to feel. And for her, I pray, Ruby, that you can swim, get in water, get out there and dance and move and do what you brought up 3 times at least, maybe journaling, and how important that might be to help you get in touch with your feelings. But you're still not fully there yet. It's still not matching. There's still some dissonance. And I think to be fully healed, you want the emotion to match with the severity of what you're talking about. She's a survivor, and she might still be in that fight survivor mode. And when we're in that, we can't feel. When we're in the midst of the trauma still, we cut off emotion. So that's my takeaway, is to hope that we teach ways to, continue to express and feel and heal emotion. The biggest tool that I learned from our discussion, I think we had a lot of tools that she reiterated, but the biggest tool that I think can help people, no matter what your diagnosis might be from a professional, is to separate yourself from that. You are not your diagnosis. You are not the eating disorder. And I love that she calls her eating disorder Anna. That is not her. That's a separate thing that she struggles with. And it no longer has to be her best friend, but she can call it out and say, shut the hell up, Anna. You're not going to rule what I eat anymore. Or she can say, I don't need you. We're done. You can go off. So that's a really important tool for people with any kind of disorder to really separate that and never say the words, I am anorexic or I am bulimic. It's not who you are.
Words have power.
Yes. Yes. So those are the takeaways and the tool for this week, 7 on Sundays. Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Leby and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7 on Sundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.